Am I going at a good pace for everybody? Everybody good? All right, so let's go ahead and do a registration controller. Right-click controllers, add new controller. So in our index, we'll go through the process of actually just spitting out all of the sessions, right? This is where you come in to sign up. So to do that, first we'll need to actually add some sessions. Before I do that, make sure that's an identity column. So by not putting identity there, it won't auto number. Okay. Then you get into weirdness where you start typing in sessions and it freaks out. You go, define a primary key. Zone. I'm really confused. All right. So this will be session 1. This is a good session. 2115, 30 people. This is session 2. This is a great session. 3006. I don't know. 30 people. Session 3. This guy jumps around like a fairy. In class. 15 people because it's in such high demand. This guy jumps. So, now we got sessions. So we need a DB context, get the sessions, build a session view model, send the view model to the view. Right? Easy enough. So using project, no. DB context, context equals new, project DB context. Not create that. PROJ. Oh. Alright. So I've seen lots of people do this. So I assumed that it would pick up my class by IntelliSense, right? And I always do. Just start typing and then it just picks it up and does it. So I typed it in here, totally assuming that it would do that. I did my little click thing, and it came up, and I didn't pay attention. I saw it, but I didn't think. And it said generate class for project DB context. Excuse me. That is not what I wanted it to say. Why?
It'll create a new class.
It'll create a new class. Which then means what?
It's empty.
That it's empty. Therefore, all the work that I've done up to this point is
Useless.
correct. And that's a big deal for some people. Some people don't realize that. They'll go in here and say generate new class. And all their code is good. Things light up in funky colors. They go to do a build. No, this is, oh yeah, I actually had a student ask me this. They said, I did this, I put it in a using statement, and now it's yelling at me because it's saying I dispose must be implemented. And I was like, so we created this new class. Well, if we look at our actual DB context, which by the way is project DB, capital DB context, it inherits from DB context. DB context implements iDisposable. That's why you can wrap it in a using statement. Without implementing iDisposable, you can't use the using statement. So by creating the new project DB context with a different casing, it doesn't inherit DB context, it doesn't implement anything, and that's why you get that error. So people will start fighting this implementation because you're going to get build errors, you're going to be missing stuff, you're going to be like, I got it, but it's not here, I don't understand what happened. And that's why. So instead, we want to get rid of it. And he lives in here. It's both of them. Because the first time it created it, I caught it, and I Control-Z'd it. So what it did is it emptied the contents of the file, but it didn't delete the file. And then the second time I did it as the example, it created the version 2. So you guys may not be moving as fast as me, so probably paying more attention to that is important, but when you see it, second guess. Because what it should tell you is this. Do you want to add a using statement? Which you do. And the code does the same thing. It lights up the same way. Except for this guy because he's spelled wrong, or cased wrong. So the casing matters. So defining a convention that works for you as a developer is important to make sure that you've got consistency. You don't just start building new classes all over the place. All right, so let's see, what do we need here? We're going to set up a few variables. List of session view model, which doesn't exist. But they will. And then we're going to say context dot sessions. How do I want to do this? So someone else told me they were having an interesting issue where they were doing the whole select thing and saying new session view model. I guess I should make one of these before I get too far down the rabbit hole. And it was coming back and it was yelling at them. It was saying, well, you can't create an instance of a view model within a entity. What does it say? Entities does not support something with this type. I don't know how many of you may have seen that. Basically what happens is when we say context.sessions, sessions returns a DB set. That DB set is very malleable. It's so malleable that it literally is nothing more than a straight select statement. Select star from sessions. Then when you do .where, it appends a where clause to that query statement. When you say .order by, then it adds an order by to that SQL statement. It's just building a SQL statement. And it's refining it and adjusting it as you continue to add things to that call. That itself can be stored in a variable and you can carry it around and continue to manipulate it within your code. It doesn't actually call to the database and do the pull until you would either wrap it in a for loop, call to list, call to array, or call to something and create an actual collection of objects in memory. So the whole time you're dealing with this malleable thing, almost an abstract object. So when you start doing things like context.sessions.select, you're implying that you have objects from the database and you want to actually do something with them. And what happens is that if this session view model becomes too sophisticated, where it doesn't just deal with primitive types, the entity framework goes, I have no idea what you're trying to accomplish, you're crazy, can't do it. And it'll throw you an exception. And the easiest workaround to this is after you do all of your context.sessions, if you've got some where clauses in there, let's say we have active and inactive sessions. We have an is active field in our database table. We can say where all sessions is active, right? Then we can do .select and then create that view model. It'll give us an error. So instead you say where, whatever, then you do .toList. And what happens is all of the DTO data, all the rows from the database, get pulled into memory, objects get created, and then when you do the select, you're not selecting from the database directly, you're actually selecting from objects in memory. Because Entity Framework doesn't know how to create session view models from the database data, but link to objects, which looks exactly like link to entities, knows how to take a collection of session DTOs and push them into session view model objects. All right, I'll show you the difference, and it's very slight, and it won't click until you see it. Who was it that had this issue? It was one of you three guys, wasn't it?
What was 3?
Yeah, I think it was Craig. I think he's not listening. Were you the one that had the to-list issue?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And that fixed it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. See, he's not even paying attention. All right. So let me go back, and then we'll go forward. So let me create my session view model. All right, let me include my using statement. And then what I need to pull from here is the ID, the name, description, capacity, I don't know if there's anything else, room. I'll call to-list here, and then I'll say session VMs equals that. Okay. All right, so the first thing is I didn't actually add properties to my session view model. I'm going to do them right here using the refactoring. Cruise that up for the guys in the back. Turn it out of the way. So ID doesn't exist, so I want to create a stub for ID. Name doesn't exist, so I want to create a stub for name. Description doesn't exist, create a stub. Capacity, create a stub. Room, create a stub. Those stubs are generated based off of the types that I'm assigning them to. So basically, ID is an int, so the stub is an int type. Name is a string, so the stub is in string type. String, int, string, all based off of those assignments. So the DTOs are int, string, string, int, string. So the view model gets generated because of that, the fact that this is an int, therefore this is an int. DTO, session view model. DTO string, session view model now has a string property called name. All the way down. Okay? Cut, paste, cut, paste. All right, so now we have sessions. Send them to the view, save. All right, so now the last step, and we'll get into more of the mechanics in a minute. I'm just going to right click, say add view. Index, I'm going to choose the list template. I'm going to do session view model as my model class. I had to uncheck create as partial because it remembered that from when I created my partial. Leave everything else, hit add. And then it's going to attempt to try to create a table layout for my view model. Name, description, capacity, room. Not too bad. So now let's run. And I'm hoping it'll blow up. Hmm. All right, so what it says is additional information. So what happened is I'm getting the exception. It says system.invalid operation exception occurred in the Entity Framework DLL but was not handled in user code. So that means that you did it wrong. I did it wrong. Additional information. This is the part that actually matters. Unable to determine the composite primary key ordering for type. Now, realize I'm querying sessions, right? This whole little block here is to query out session data. Right? Remember this? Select sessions, put them in the session view model, do all this stuff. This is not talking about sessions. It's talking about 15FS class project models data user session class. The reason is that I'm dealing with the DB context. The DB context itself, when it first spins up, goes through a whole series of integrity checks on its own, looking at the database, looking at its schema, looking at the DTOs, looking at the DB sets, making sure that it all jives. Long before it even goes out and creates a query or queries some data. And it's doing that to ensure that the objects that you have, the version of the objects you have, match the version in the database. So that when it generates that SQL code, it makes sense when it goes to send it to the SQL server. It doesn't want to have to wait until the end and go, oh, your code is wrong, and therefore it won't run on the database. Now you still run into plenty of instances where that happens, but this is trying to do its best to not catch it at the end of the call, but it's trying to catch it at the beginning. So even though we're dealing with sessions here, it's already looking at the rest of the objects, including user session, and saying, hang on, something's not right. And in this case, it actually can't figure out which one of those keys inside of user session. Remember how I said the order matters? It wants to know what the order is, so that when it writes that where clause, it knows which one to put first and which one to put second. And if it puts one first, it can optimize for it and not worry about the second. Fancy, huh? So, because it was not handled in user code, I did it wrong. So let me stop. So I'm going to go back to my models, back to my user session. I'm going to look at my keys. I don't remember how to fix it. Entity framework, composite key.
You can just like parentheses 0 and like parentheses 1 or something.
Yeah, but it didn't show up in the overloads.
Yeah, I think it's like comma, column, and then you open parentheses. That's the one I remember at least. And
Order.
It's like option, or it's order equals 1, or 0, I guess. 0
Well, in theory, then I should be able to just put it in here. Alright, let's try that, and if it doesn't work. I thought it was something like that. That's why I went into key. I thought key, that's where you put the number, but...
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Type name equals... Alright, let's give that a shot.
You don't need type names.
I don't?
I didn't have to when I did it for the midterm. I just put order equals 0 and then the other one's order equals 1.
And then you just put the column name in?
It was column named in that.
Oh. Alright, well, I'm already here.
Too late to turn back.
I gotta highlight stuff and cut it and move it. Try not to grab my mouse in the process. Alright, F6. Compiler took it. I'm okay with that. Alright, so it's compiled. I'm still running. Blah, blah, blah. F5. Nope, I am not still running. Alright, so for everybody else who's looking at this going, what did he just do? Let me jump back to user sessions. So in my user sessions table, the order matters. So if we look down here, and I know it's down at the bottom, let me see if I can move it up. Zoom in a little bit. Alright, you'll notice that this third line, line number 4, the actual text editor, says constraint PK user sessions, primary key is clustered. Clustered because it's multiple columns. User ID is ascending, that's the first column in the cluster. Session ID is the second column in the cluster. That order is important. Entity Framework wants to know that order. So putting that order in that attribute helps it to understand which one's first.
You have to do it like that if it's not really matter.
Well, I did it 2 different ways.
Okay.
So what information is there matters. The way that the parameters are in there does not matter. And the reason is that I won't get into the reason. It'll confuse you more. Sequence contains no matching elements. What the heck does that mean? Alright, let me hook my debugger back up. See, it's not just you guys who has problems with stuff. I run into this all the time.
I run into it more.
You run into it more? That's probably true. The sequence contains no matching elements. So context, yeah. Sessions, okay. Alright, so let's try this. Let's do it in 2 steps. Let's actually do this. I'm going to go ahead and jump to 2 lists. I want to see if it makes a difference. Nope, did not. Sequence contains no matching elements. Expected exception, yeah. Alright, so let's do this. Let's pull this out. So you understand what's happening, or at least from what I'm understanding is happening. It's saying that we're trying to pull sessions and there aren't any, which isn't true. So all the stuff that's happening after context.session, at this point is irrelevant until we can get an object back. So what I'm going to do is do context.session.first.default and put a breakpoint right here. My goal is to pull back the first row from the database, from the sessions table. If I can do that successfully, that means that I'm connecting and I've got data coming out of the database and then there's something else goofy. That's basically what I'm thinking at this point. So start small and see where we go. So F6 to build. Sessions. And then reattach my debugger. Reload. Sequence contains no matching element. Session select. Alright. So what I'm doing now is I'm wrapping this in a try-catch block. Just this line. Because the debugger in Visual Studio is picking up the top little error, but it's possible that there's another wrapped error inside of it. And that may have more details than just saying the sequence doesn't contain an item. So the only way you can see that is by actually wrapping that line in a try-catch. This object O equals null. That's just so I can put a breakpoint in. Doesn't do anything except for allow Visual Studio to break on a line of code. So if I reattach, rerun, all right, so you have different pieces of data inside your exception object. And each exception is different because system.exception is the base class for all exceptions, and then you inherit exception to build your own exceptions. So you can build your own exception class and throw it. You just have to inherit from the base exception class first. So this is an invalid operation exception, and we've got no inner exception, but there's also a data element here that may be useful. So we'll open that. So there's keys and values. If we do this results view, we can refresh this. This should give us more of a grid. Okay. But there's no keys, so there's nothing in there. System link single. Why is it calling single? So what was happening when I did the first or default in the stack trace? It might show up here. If not, I'll go back. This is important. I feel like it is helping you guys understand how to debug your code. So what was happening in the stack trace was that line of code where I called first or default, it was calling single. Now when you call single, it's saying return back one result from this DB query. And if more than one result exists, it actually throws an exception saying more than one result came back, invalid. It's kind of a safety measure. If you call first, then you get back 3 results, it returns the first time. Well, what's happening is it's calling single somehow. And when it calls single, nothing is coming back, and then it's throwing that exception saying that there's nothing in the sequence, which also is not true. So what I'm trying to do is kind of walk around the exception. So what I'm doing now is I'm grabbing that DB set and storing it straight into a variable called session. Then I'm taking the session and I'm trying to select the IDs. So my goal is to get a collection of just the primary keys out of the table, being explicit. Now you'll notice here that I put it into var IDs. The reason is that this select will actually return me what's called an iQueryable object. That iQueryable is that thing I was talking about that stores that SQL code. So instead of actually going to the database and getting the IDs back, it's writing the SQL query to go get the IDs from the database. So what I also want to see here is what query is it actually writing before it goes and connects to the database, if I get that far. So I'm set up for debug, I'm refreshing. Should hit my breakpoint. So session contains that DB set. So now when I did session select, it already hit the exception. Sequence contains no matching element. What the heck is it doing? Alright, so let's jump into the watch. So what the watch does is it allows you to peek into your variables. So do we still have session? Okay. We lost it because we dropped out of the try block. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. Reattach. And then refresh my page. I want to get back in there and I want to see what I can see. So it's basically investigation. Let me go down to the next line. So session is DB set. If I say session.toString operation, that's queryable. So if we spin open session, and you actually can do this, you can dig into these objects within the .NET framework. So this is something that comes out of Entity Framework. We have no access to the source code, but we can actually drill into these objects and look at them. We can even get into the private members, what actually makes it tick. So if we look at the internal query, that's not telling me anything. Alright, so let's go back and look at our... Is anybody else getting it to work? Maybe as the first question. Is anybody else trying it? Is it failing? Nobody? No, okay.
When I did it for the midterm, I just used the PTO object.
Yeah.
That's what I have it returned to as.
Right, that's fine, but we're not even getting that far. I'm not even getting the DTO back from the database.
In the select state.
Yeah, like in this case, like when I just like grab me the IDs, when I do this, just like get me the IDs, which is just using the DTO basically. It's giving me that error.
Is there anything for the database?
Huh?
Did you populate the database?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, I even checked it.
Try, so you're not even getting to the IDs, you said?
Yeah.
What's the context say when you look at, like when you break and hover over the context or watch it and then
Yeah.
what's that saying?
It says it exists, like it's active. And you're saying this context?
Yeah. Like what's it say for the session? I think you can refresh the bottom one and it tells you.
Sequence contains no matching elements. Same error.
Oh, it says matching. We're not doing some equation.
You're searching.
That's what I'm thinking.
You're searching, right? So it should say.
Not at this point. This is just doing a raw dump.
The table stands.
Yeah.
What happens if you make the sessions an array and then try searching ID for the ID?
It'll
It's the same thing
it'll
with
give me that
CSS.
error because I already tried it.
All right.
Yeah, that's where I was.
Check your users table.
My users.
Make sure that one's finding that one.
Oh.
That was working.
Yeah. Alright, so let's try this then. That's interesting. So let's go back to our context. Did those key orders start at 0?
Yeah. Not from the database. I think
Yeah.
the first one's 0 and then it was on like array.
Do you still have them like done the 2 different ways?
I do. So I'm kind of eliminating it completely for a moment. Because that's the only other thing I can think of that's a sequence is those orders. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, it worked. So that user session's freaking it out.
All the variables match, all the ins match ins in that table.
Huh?
Like in the SQL table, or the varchars go into strings and like the integers go into integers.
Yeah, they're all the same, but I think it's that order that's.
Yeah, I think it was something with the keys.
So it just got into the order.
Huh?
You just put a breakpoint. Did you really fix the issue, or should you just skip over the issue?
I fixed the issue, and I fixed it by commenting out the DB set in my context.
I know, but
To get it to work,
at this point.
I commented out this user session DB set.
Okay, but that's not what you were originally trying to do.
No, it wasn't at all. What I originally was trying to do, I got to work, and I got it to work by commenting this out. Does that make any sense?
No, it just makes it seem like you're.
All right. No, it's fine. And I mean, that's the thing. You run into this thing where you get sidetracked because you're trying to do one thing and then the other thing doesn't work and you're back and forth. So what we were originally trying to do, assuming there was no error, was we were trying to write this section of code where we go to the context, grab the sessions, and then for each row in the in sessions, we want to create a session view model.
Right, which there was nothing wrong with that code other than in the project DB context, it was trying to also figure out what the user session is.
Correct. So this code is fine. It functions as it should. Everything is great. So there was nothing wrong with this code. It was the fact that we introduced user sessions and clustered primary keys and multiple different ways of setting those up apparently, and everything went out the window. So taking that out, this works. Okay? So now, if we go back to our context, and we'll put it back, and now you guys are telling me the way that is recommended by the internet.
Yeah, it's put in the same annotation as the key.
So put it in the same as the
But
key.
I had my column name was the same in my database, so I didn't have to annotate it that way.
So you just did the order.
So maybe if you
Okay, so let's play the game. Why not? So column order 0, column order 1, right?
yeah.
Okay. So in theory, we should refresh and everything should just work. All right. Well, so that's good, but I want it to work my way.
Yeah. Maybe it's just the wrong order of the argument.
Does you need to have order in this?
So let me look at the overloads on this for a minute. String name. Ah, that's why. Okay. So, you'll notice a few things here. And this is some of the stuff where the people that did the C# language were like, hey, let's make it really easy for you to deal with parameters when things get a little funky. So they came up with this idea. This is the thing I was trying not to explain because I figured it would confuse you. They came up with this idea of having what are called named parameters. And basically a named parameter is you explicitly give the name of the parameters. Or when you write a function, you have parameters, and you have those parameter variables, you give them their own name. Well, those names are known by the person calling the function. So you can actually explicitly call those parameters by name and say this parameter equals this value, this parameter equals this value, and completely ignore the order that they should be passed in. So even though the function may be written as name, comma, order number, we could put them in as order, comma, name. But you have to explicitly say which one is which. And that's okay. It gives you flexibility, blah, blah, blah. It gives you flexibility until somebody decides not to completely follow the convention and they like to mix and match them. Which is fine, it works, the language allows it, but it confuses the heck out of people. So what happened is that the first option for column attribute is just to pass in named parameters. Just throw caution to the wind and say this parameter is this value, this parameter is this value, and be done with it. And that works. So before, when I had name type or type name equals, when you guys were like, you don't have to do that, that's too much work, I was like, okay. If I had done that, it would have worked fine. Because I explicitly typed or gave each parameter name. Then doing the string comma is an actual separate overload. So you can just put the string in, which is what we had originally. And that string is fine with no named parameters. Then the third overload option is do the string and the named parameters. And because I had the named parameter on the front, it assumed that that was the first name parameter, and then which was order, and then there was a string after that, and it didn't know what parameter it was for. So that was probably why we were actually getting the sequence error, or it was trying to interpret it as something and it was throwing a mess. So the name parameter piece is what messed us up there. So it'll accept the string, which is the column name, and then the name parameter of order after it. So that order, the sequence order there, is important unless you're naming them both explicitly. And that's why then it should be working. So F5, refresh. All right. So now that part works.